evening, everyone. I, Khushi Chaudhary, with my co-host Abhishek Mishra, students of first year DME Media School, welcome you all to the last session of day 9, where we are going to have our last panel discussion of the second edition of the world's first 10-day Digital Live International Conference ICAN4. Despite the global pandemic, DME Media School, in collaboration with the School of Communication and Creative Arts, Deakin University, Melbourne, Australia, is holding this most awaited conference internationally through virtual means. We are extremely happy to announce that ICAN4 is being supported by Indian Council of Social Science Research, ICSSR. Before starting with the discussion, I would like to brief you all about the previous editions of ICAN that were indeed a bag full of knowledge. ICAN 1, held in March 2018, was based on the theme India and Changing Aspects of News. ICAN 2, held in November 2018, was all about Indian cinema and alternate networks. And ICAN 3, the first online edition of the conference, was held in June 2020. And the theme was Issues of Community, Agenda and News with the hashtag Conference for Change. The theme for this year's conference is Information, Communication and Artificial Networks. And the hashtag is Communication Redefined. Under the ICAN4 flagship, there are certain highlights that I would like our listeners to know, like the participation of about 60 eminent scholars from 5 continents and 11 countries, namely India, South Korea, Malaysia, Singapore, Bangladesh, USA, Mexico, France, Italy, Australia, and Ghana. More than 100 media educators and researchers have gathered to present their papers in the conference. There are 36 live sessions scheduled, including 9 technical sessions, 3 workshops, 7 panel discussions, 3 special sessions, and 10 masterclasses. And how wonderful is that all the 9 technical sessions are being chaired and co-chaired by women scholars representing different states of the country. ICAN4 would not have been possible without the support of our partners. We would like to thank our partners. Knowledge partners are K.R. Mangalam University, Gurugram, Haryana, Adamas University, Kolkata, Makhanlal Chaturvedi, National University of Journalism and Mass Communication, Bhopal, and Vigyan Prasad, Government of India. And our academic partner is the Department of Communication and Journalism, Guwahati University. And our international partner is Institute for International Journalism, EW Scripps School of Journalism, Ohio University, USA. And our media partner is the Policy Times.
DME Media School, in collaboration with School of Communication and Creative Arts, Deakin University, Melbourne, Australia, takes immense pride in staying afloat while working for this day where we all share screens together to treat us with the most knowledgeable discussions, deliberations, and thoughts. I'd like to extend my warm regards towards SPARK, that stands for Students with Positive Attitude and Resonating Communication, the Student Council of DME Media School. Also towards Journalism at DME, which is the official newsletter of DME Media School. This fortnightly publication covers all the major activities happening in and out the campus. It is a student-centric newsletter carried out entirely by them under the supervision of faculty members. You can check out DME TV, the official YouTube channel of DME, where you can find the playlist related to all sessions, lecture series, film festivals, and conference. We are streaming live on our official Facebook page of ICAN for all panel discussions, masterclasses, and special sessions. Now, I would like to request Professor Dr. Amrish Saxena, Dean DME Media School, Director DME Studios and Production, Convener ICAN4, Director International Relations, Delhi Metropolitan Education, Noida, to please say a few words.
Thanks, Abhishek. Welcome everybody on board in this panel. This is a 10-day conference and we have not only entered the 9th day, we are finishing the 9th day with this panel discussion. Tomorrow will be the final day and we will be having the valedictory in the evening, almost the same time at which we are meeting today. So I'm obliged to Kathryn Lancioni because she is one who has been instrumental in bringing so much pride, so much value to this conference. Already she had 2 sessions in this conference wherein we were unveiling her book, the 3rd book on PR practices. And then obviously there was a session of Kathryn with Dr. Pooja, which was about the discussion about the state of public relations in the backdrop of COVID-19. So obviously COVID-19 is one such thing which has affected us all, irrespective of whichever country we are living in. And in fact, this conference is also affected, whether positively or negatively, because last year also, when this COVID-19 struck, we had to convert this conference, which was earlier to be scheduled in the physical mode, in the virtual mode or in the online mode. And that is how we spread it to 10 days, and it was converted as the first conference in the world, which was 10-day digital live conference. This year, we were planning to have it in the hybrid mode in May, but then in India, the second wave of COVID-19 struck in April and May, and then again we had to shift it to July, and now we are having it as an online conference. But then there are good things involved. Whenever we are doing something which is in the virtual mode, in the online mode, then it is always possible to connect to people living in different countries. So any session that we are organizing, our horizon opens, and all those people who are attending the session, obviously they will get a different perspective. They will get a global outlook. So for that, obviously I am again thankful to Kathryn and to Dr. Pooja Arora to make it possible that this session is happening, and the other panelists who have added glamour to this PR session, which is on the international public relations. These are the panelists. So I welcome Christine, I welcome Paola, I welcome Florence, and I welcome Ellie to this conference. And I wish that this whole session will be a success, and we will finally land up getting something new, something valuable out of this session. Thank you all.
Thank you, Dr. Saxena. Just a note, we have one panelist that's having problems with her mic and camera, so if someone could assist her, it's Ramya from Singapore. So if you guys could help, that'd be great. Good morning, everyone. And again, thank you to DME and to Deakin University and to Dr. Saxena in particular for all of the support and this wonderful platform for us to talk about the field of public relations on a global scale. And I have to say, I'm humbled and thrilled today to be joined by an incredible group of women from around the world who are intimately involved in the field of public relations. All of these women graciously gave up many hours of their week to prep and participate in this panel, and I'm really excited for you all to hear from them today. Before I introduce the panelists, I just wanted to give you a brief reason as to why we're doing this. So, as many of you know, both Dr. Pooja and I are PR practitioners as well as PR professors. And I'm happy to say that Christine Perkett, who also joins me from the United States, is also a PR professor. And what we've realized in talking is the importance of discussing, illustrating, and kind of thinking about as a group, the differences in international PR. And so we wanted to get this panel together today to showcase some of the similarities and some of the differences in how we do what we do around the world. And to explain, and talk about techniques that used to be popular but are no longer popular, as well as things that are on the forefront of exploding. So with that, sit back, listen, enjoy, put your questions into the chat. I'm going to introduce the panelists. They're going to then give a brief some information about their background. We're then going to go into a discussion, and then at the end, we'll have a Q&A. So again, thank you all for dialing in. Again, a huge thanks to Dr. Saxena. And what else can I say, but we're so excited to be here. So today I have joining me, as I already mentioned, Christine Perkett. She's from the United States. She's the CEO of Mindful Marketing, and she's someone that is near and dear to my heart. When I transitioned out of corporate PR into I don't know what, consulting, I guess. I got the honor and pleasure of working with Christine. And she was, I think, the first person in the US to have a virtual PR firm about 10, 15 years ago. She can talk to you more about that. My second two folks that are joining me from Europe are Florence Jouve from France and Paola Chiasserni from Italy. Then I have Dr. Pooja, of course, joining us from India. I have Alejandra Leglisse from Mexico. And I have Ramya Chandrasekaran from Singapore. And all of these women are the best of the best and eminent PR professionals and scholars in their own way. So ladies, please feel free to chime in and talk about, introduce yourselves. So Christine, why don't you go first?
Hi, thank you so much for having me. It's actually been 23 years, so I'm dating myself. But yes, so I am the CEO and founder of Mindful Marketing and PR, formerly Perkett PR. We rebranded a few years ago. We're here in Boston, Mass, and we are a global Marcom and PR agency serving tech, healthcare, and consumer companies, mostly in US and Europe. I'm also the founder of a consumer goods company called YupSup and a board member for several technology startups. And as Kathryn mentioned, an adjunct professor of digital marketing and media at Northeastern University in Boston. And I'm very excited to be here because all of these panelists are amazing and I'm going to learn as I'm also participating. So thank you for having me.
Oh, pleasure. Florence, how about you go next?
Hi, very nice meeting you, and I'm so excited to meet you all and have a chance to talk with you. My name is Florence. I'm French. I've had more than 25 years of experience in communication, most of it in PR. I've worked half of my career in agencies and half of the rest of it internally in companies, mostly in quite technological environments, computing, e-commerce, energy. I've had the chance to create and lead some communications department in startups, but also to work in huge companies such as Amazon. And today I'm a consultant. I'm working with an international communication network called ICAN4. And for them, I coordinate the implementation of communication campaigns for the European Commission, inside and outside of the European Union. Nice to meet you.
Thank you. Paola?
Hello, everybody. First of all, let me warmly thank you for inviting me to this conference. I'm so pleased and excited. I'm Paola, I come from Italy, and I'm Senior Business Manager from Omnicom PR Group, which is an international, worldwide known PR agency. We have in Italy our offices in Milan. I've been working in the PR sector since almost 20 years, or more than 20 years, both in companies and in agencies, international agencies. Since 15 years, I've been dealing with food and beverage industry, both from a brand PR and corporate PR. So I'm dealing clients such as Barilla, McDonald's, Corona beer, and many other very well-known international and Italian brands. I'm really happy and excited. Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us from your vacation. We really appreciate it. Ali, why don't you go next?
Hi, my name is Alejandra. Ale is here. I'm very happy to be part of this panel. I'm very excited to share all this experience with you. I have been working in communication for the last 25 years. I started in the media as a reporter and an editor, and then I made a transition to the PR sector. And I'm specialized in NGOs, non-government organizations. I work with UN Women Mexico and Climate Reality Project, also Mexico chapter. And I've been working all these years in corporate PR as well as cultural. So I'm thrilled to share my experience with you.
Thanks again for joining us. Okay, Ramya, why don't you go next?
All right. Hi, good evening to everybody. And thank you, Kathryn, for having me on the panel. So I'm based in Singapore and I'm the Chief Communications Officer for the QI Group, which is a global conglomerate that's headquartered in Hong Kong. We have many different businesses in different parts of the world. And in my role, I oversee a very diverse, multicultural, multi-talented team that's spread across about 15 countries. I've been in the communications business for over 20 years, and some of the things that I've been involved in include PR, traditional PR, brand building, social media marketing, largely reputation management and storytelling. I think if somebody were to ask me what I do in one simple word, I would say it's just really storytelling through different platforms.
So true. So true. Is that, I have to ask, is that your house or your virtual backgroground? I love that.
It's my aspirational home, but right now this is my virtual background.
I love that. And of course, okay, so last but certainly not least, Dr. Pooja.
Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Pooja Arora. Firstly, I would like to say that I'm extremely honored to be a part of such a diverse set of panelists from different countries and cultures. All thanks to Kathryn and Dr. Saxena for bringing all of us together. So, you know, it's a little embarrassing to talk about oneself when you know that, you know, you don't have that much experience among the panelists. Yeah, but I would start by saying that, you know, people and their stories have always interested me, and this led me to study psychology and thereafter pursue a career in public relations. I have over 11 years of experience in PR and corporate communications, working in varied sectors. I'm also, like the other panelists said, I'm a strong believer in the power of storytelling, and I use to develop strategic communication programs on a regular basis. My first job was with an NGO where my role was to work with the sponsorship team and draft heartwarming content. In my current role, I drive strategy for my organization. I have also worked with a PR agency where I learned most of the PR strategies, client meetings, pitches, storytelling, writing speeches. So, you know, everything. So yeah, that is about me. Thank you.
There we go. Excellent. Well, thank you again. Thank you all for joining. Thank you all for introducing yourselves. I always think that when we introduce ourselves, we get to share what we want to share. And I think that's so incredibly important. So, all right. So we are going to start off talking about international PR. And the first question, and Florence, I know you're going to take the lead on this one, is, you know, we talk about international PR. I teach a course in international PR, but the question really is, what is international PR and why is it important? Oh, we can't hear you. You're muted. There you go. You're good. No problem.
Well, international PR is, of course, conveying some messages, business projects, management projects across several countries. And generally what it means is getting out of your own country, is getting out of your comfort zone. And so international PR generally includes two layers, which is developing an international strategy and messages and information that you want to push in various countries or regions of the world, and managing to have those messages and projects implemented wisely in each of the countries. So basically, international PR, and it's a paradox, is also kind of local PR. It has to go together.
I'm going to ask you one question just because I've heard you lecture before we get into the panel's response. So talk about some of the challenges that you have in working with the European Commission, right? Because, you know, there are so many countries that are in Europe. They all speak different languages. It's all different cultures. What are the challenges you face in rolling out a campaign just in Europe, which it truly is, it embodies the concept of international?
Well, the main challenge is because in Europe, we don't have too many jet lag challenges. So that's fine on that side. But yeah, the main challenges are cultural, and Europe is such a variety of audiences and psychological approaches and cultural differences. If you want to talk to the Mediterranean countries, and I would say I'm part of that, but yeah, we're in the middle in France. But if you talk to Italians, to Spanish people, to Portuguese people, you have a very emotional approach, for instance. And so when you want to give an information, push a message, you have to to really give emotion to it. While when you go to more Nordic countries, Finland, that can be Germany, also the Netherlands, then you have to argue. And that's a cliche. And of course, it's not 100% each of it. But that's, that's really the cultural approach, which is the most interesting too, the most challenging, but the most interesting.
Yeah, I mean, when we talked before, I found that whole thing fascinating, just because, as you said, you don't really have time zone challenges in Europe, but in terms of cultural interpretation, it's huge. And, when you're pitching something to a German reporter, it's going to be very, very different than pitching something to somebody in Spain or Italy, or when you're looking to do the key messaging for, as you noted, Italy or Spain, it's going to be very, very different than Sweden or Norway. So I think, Europe is just so interesting in that sense. So, okay, who else wants to comment on this topic?
May I?
Okay, go ahead. I can go now.
Okay. So why don't we do, I should people raise their hand now. Why don't we do Paola and then Ramya and then Pooja?
Yes, I think from a brand point of view, I've been working on international PR with many companies, like for example, San Pellegrino and Acquapanna, which are I think very famous water. We were the headquarters here in Italy, and our main objective was to really create one voice for one brand all around the world. Obviously, then supporting the local PR agencies so that they could implement and localize the key messages and the tone of voice that should in any case been one, because the brand was one and had to talk in the same way all around the world. But definitely the hard work was to support the agencies so that they could pitch the journalists and localize the messages according to the culture, the religion, and the different way of interpreting locally, all the messages and the stories that we wanted to share. So that was a really most important thing in dealing with the hub, as we were the hub agency in Italy.
Yeah, I mean, I know when I worked at Ogilvy, one of the phrases that we used a lot was global and globalization. How do you take that corporate brand or that corporate personality and roll it out or translate it into each of these various kind of sub-personalities that all have to be part of the same person? Yeah, it's fascinating stuff. Ramya, why don't you go?
So I wanted to just share a little bit about my experience, because I happen to work for a company that has a presence in many different parts of the world. And I had the incredible opportunity to build a team from scratch and also learn along the way, really. So I sort of learned international PR as I went along. I didn't really know what I was doing initially, but it was interesting. So obviously, the first thing you realize is when a company begins to expand its business and its presence across borders, you have to be sensitive to not just political and economic differences, but also cultural differences between different nations. And every country has its own media landscape, its own PR rules, and there are local laws and regulations. So one of my biggest learnings I've realized, it's to have a really strong international PR strategy. It is so critical to help brands understand these differences, how to adapt to them, how to get your messaging right in your target markets. And I find that I have to keep changing the way I communicate the exact same core message, depending on who I'm speaking with. So I find that quite fascinating.
I agree with you. And I think that goes into what Florence was talking about in terms of cultural interpretation, right? What's, values that are important in one country or one region of one country, such as India, which is a good lead into Pooja, can really dictate how you roll out, what you're going to roll out, what strategy you implement. Do you lead with this? Do you lead with a case study, for example, or a customer success story? Or do you go with an analyst quote? Or do you lead with facts? Like we all always have, as you've mentioned, we always have all this like great toolkit of stuff, but how we use it and when we use it and what we decide to highlight can vary tremendously. Yeah, I have to agree with you. I'm someone too that kind of learned this industry from the ground up. I just kind of, I'll do that. And then, you're like, oh my gosh, what am I doing? So I appreciate your perspective on the international front. Pooja, why don't you go?
Yeah, so I'm going to share my own personal story only. So, a decade back, I was working on a PR mandate for a client that required me to coordinate for an event along with The Economist magazine. And, Economist magazine is like one of the most premier international magazines, that it's something where, and somewhere where, you know, all and everyone wants to be. So it was that time when I realized how expensive, firstly, it was to work with them from the client's point of view, but I also learned their style of working. You know, I also understood that there are only two types of organizations that can get featured in an Economist. One who can pay a lot of money, you know, and one, I mean, obviously for their paid feature, and other which is like extremely good in whatever they are doing. So one will never really consider going or opting for Economist or reaching out to Economist for a regular story unless, you know, their story, you know, is like a path breaker or something. So this is one example that I thought of sharing while I was doing international PR for a client. Yes.
That's great. Thank you. All right. Let's move on to the next question. Ali, this is yours. And the question is, PR is an evolving field. What are some of the changes you've seen in the industry over the past 5 years?
Well, in my experience in Mexico, there has been like the most important changes that have been is that before the pandemic began, the media entered into a strong economic crisis, which forced them to reduce their teams to the maximum and made it increasingly difficult for them to attend all these press conferences and different events that you organize as PR. So to help them, and in response of that, many of the PR agency had to acquire more editorial functions to compensate that lack of hands in the newsrooms. So in other words, you have to have a very good storytelling and some basic notions of journalism, so you can offer them pitches beyond traditional press releases like prefabricated contents, testimonials, and they also are expecting you to have develop some journalistic notes so you can pitch them some angles for different stories. So I think that the biggest change has been like you have to have very good storytelling to get the attentions that you need.
Excellent.
And maybe in second, I think that influencer marketing has a big role. I think like at least in Mexico, the boom of the influencer marketing is getting down. I think that we are getting to an inflection point in which I don't know in other countries, but at least in Mexico, the influencer has suffered a very hard reputational crisis. So many brands are reconsidering to use them for PR or advertising. I mean, I just want to share with you one example of these things that I'm telling you, but in the recent elections, a group of influencers broke the electoral ban to support a political party, and the response in social media was very negative. So many major brands decided to bet to them, and they are even facing legal charge. And these were like the first generations of influencers, like these big stars that everybody wants to work with. And because of this, like brands and companies are having second thoughts about how efficient will influencer marketing will be for their campaigns, and which influencers are the ones that have the best profile to work with.
I have to just say that I think that's so interesting because I do think that we kind of, at least in the US, so building on what you're saying about Mexico, I think that we kind of everyone was so excited about influencer marketing because in some ways, it's less expensive than traditional advertising because you're only paying one person who you think represents a target market. But I think it's been overdone here. And I know we have here, and I think globally this is happening too, is the rise of the micro influencer. So, you know, rather than taking one person, say, for example, a Kim Kardashian, and paying her a lot of money to represent the brand, you take a series of micro influencers and use them to represent, you know, subsegments of target markets that you think your brand appeals to. But that's really interesting about Mexico. Okay, who else wants to comment on this one?
I could go.
Okay, absolutely. Go ahead.
Sure. So, PR, as all of us know, it is an evolving field. We've come a long way from just written content to now video and digital content, which is rising exponentially. Earlier mass emailing was something that every PR person was using, but now it's focused pitching, and even the journalists have realized that whether they are getting like a mass email or whether it's a customized pitch made and focused specifically to them. So these are some of the changes that are there. Then rather than focusing in India specifically, earlier we used to have specific PR campaigns only, but I think after the pandemic, the focus has now been on a 360-degree approach. So people have started using an integrated approach of merging everything together. So social media, traditional media, digital content, everything is coming together. So it's like not one particular department can work in silos. If you want to communicate about a particular campaign, about a particular brand, then you have to come together. So yeah, these are some of the changes I thought I'd.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Ramya, I'm just curious, what are you seeing there from Singapore? Because Singapore is such an interesting country in so many ways, but globally with brands, and what trends have you seen or changes have you seen in the industry?
Just like everybody else is saying, it's really the growth of social media. And if you realize, unlike say about 10 years ago, you no longer have to send an email or a pitch to a journalist if you want to get your message out. Because now today, as a communications professional, you can just use a combination of own digital assets and social media to amplify your message without needing really a traditional media platform. And also the success of media coverage is no longer really measured by column in space or share of voice, but it's more, the number of social shares, website hits, and the engagement stats. So these are obviously some things that I'm seeing definitely in the last 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Okay. All right, let's move on to the next question, which sort of dovetails nicely with this. And Christine, this is your question. How do you view social media as it relates to PR? Is it a technique or a leading strategy?
So I wanted to just chime in on the last question, which relates
absolutely.
to this.
Yeah.
I think one thing we can't forget that's really changed is the transparency of brands that is demanded by consumers and audiences. At least here in the US, prior, internationally, we can all look at COVID as an example, but in the US with the George Floyd and Black Lives Matter issues, for example, a lot of brands got called to the mat for putting out statements that didn't align with what they had been doing to date. And PR had to not only do damage control, but also bring all of those silos together, as we were talking about, into one to really say, okay, who are we as a brand? And whatever we put out there has to reflect what we're actually doing. It's not enough to just make a statement or to put a tweet out with an image or something. So I think that's a big part of what I've seen change. And then social media in and of itself, in my opinion, is not a strategy. It's a tool that's part of a bigger, larger communications strategy. It's a tool to boost amplification. And just as the telephone or email doesn't make someone a good communicator, a social media channel doesn't make a brand necessarily strategic. It has to have a strategy behind it. So the content that's put out on it and the way that it's used has to be strategic. It definitely allows you to further deliver your messages and expand your reach. But again, it's got to be a part of that larger strategy. And too many brands that I've seen in my 20 some years of working across the globe really set it and forget it, or they'll see a new channel come up and they'll panic like, oh my God, we have to be on this channel. We have to do something on this channel. And they have to first calm down, go back to their strategy. What are they trying to accomplish? And really know their audiences. Are their audiences active on this yet? Are they just exploring it? How are they using it? So there's a lot of analysis to do before you jump into a social media channel. And from an international perspective, not every social network is right for every company or not right for every division or region of a country. So for example, we've worked with International Fund for Animal Welfare and Octo Telematics, which has a headquarters in Italy and a big presence here in the US. Within those clients, we would sit with our teams, we would come up with the communications, the branding and the messaging, that strategy. And then individually, the country managers would say, okay, here are the tools that we're going to use because this is what's most effective in this country. So it's definitely not a strategy. It's, in my opinion, it's definitely a tool.
Well, I completely agree with you. And I think with your point on the Black Lives Matter, George Floyd experience that we had in the US is just such a great one, because so many companies jumped on the bandwagon because they felt like they had to be on the bandwagon. And then it actually backfired and made them look bad, silly, because they were talking about things that truly weren't part of their core brand. And I just think you see that so many times. I find what's so interesting about social media, to your point, is the set it and I love your set it and forget it phrase. They said it and then they forget about it. And that's the worst thing you can do, because
it's too of the moment to do
yes.
that. There's certainly evergreen things that you can do. There's certainly all those social media, holidays that aren't even really holidays, but the hashtag that you can, set and keep. But it's something that you have to be on top of every day, literally every hour. And whether or not you're executing an international PR or marketing campaign, you're still internationally communicating. So for example, if you're going to use a specific hashtag, you've got to go see how that hashtag has been used around the world, because you don't want to get caught in a controversy that you use a hashtag that maybe in Italy was used for something negative. So whether or not you're really executing to reach an international audience, you are reaching an international audience. So I think we all have to think globally now when it comes to social media.
Well, I think excellent point. I mean, I think that when the evolution of social media has supported the evolution of international PR.
Yes.
And anyone that does anything social media wise is doing international PR, whether they realize it or not, which is a whole nother discussion panel that we could have. No, really. I mean, it's just so interesting. All right, Ramya, you're smiling and nodding a lot, so I'm going to call you out on this one. I know I have to get to Singapore to have a cup of coffee with you, because I just think that it would be like a never ending conversation.
Me too, but we have to find a place with that kind of ambiance that you have.
Anyway, Ramya, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was actually, everything that Christine said, I was like, oh my God, that's so true. There's so many people who just think, oh, I have to be on TikTok, but is your audience on TikTok? Do you even know who's using TikTok? Just because TikTok seems to be the next big thing doesn't mean you have to be on TikTok. It has to make sense, right? So I don't think a lot of brands get that. And it's this FOMO culture, which really is not helpful. It has to be, social media can never be a strategy. It has to be a tool. It's part of the larger toolkit, exactly like Christine said. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, with so many, when counseling clients, I'm sure most of us have said, okay, pause. And let's all think about why you want to do that. If you're targeting people that are senior citizens, they're probably not on TikTok. If you're going to go social media, you're going to go Facebook, if that. So yeah, I just think that, there's this rush because the brand feels like they have to. But part of our role as PR practitioners and PR strategists is to say, look, pause. Let's think about who your brand is and who it appeals to, as you both are saying. And I think it's such important knowledge for everybody. Anyone else want to chime in on this one? Anyone else? All right, let's go into the next question. And this is for Paola. Do you think that traditional tools such as press releases and in-person briefings have a role anymore, or are they tools of the past?
Well, definitely, there are still very useful tools that we need to use, especially at least here in Italy. For example, press releases are still one of the most important way to tell the story to the journalist. But considering that journalists receive a minimum of hundreds and hundreds of press releases every day, you have to differentiate yourself either with a title. So the title really has to go in the story and rise the curiosity of the journalist and make him or her understand that this story is absolutely perfect for the timing or the media title, or at least with a graphic way to rise curiosity. What we are using since 2 years ago, it's a platform, an online platform, which actually allows you to create press releases as they were newsletter. So you can scroll down the text, you can see immediately the images that are attached to that story, and then download at the end of the story, so at the end of the press release, all the press kit. And this is something that is very effective, particularly on the touristic sector, because touristic journalists are really keen to look at images, see if the images are right for the media titles, and if they're impressive, if they're attractive. So this is something that we're finding really useful for touristic. Another thing that was very useful before the pandemic was the desk-to-desk visit. So going really to the journalists, to meet him or her personally, and to have these half an hour one-to-one moment of discussion, of conversation, of telling the story, of going in deep in the story. Actually, with the pandemic, this is something that we were not allowed to do, as many editorial offices were closed and journalists worked from home most of the time. And in this case, what we found out that was very useful was the relationship that you can build with journalists. So because you had not the desk phone number to ring, and in order to tell the story, you had to have the mobile phone and really be able to jump on the phone and tell the journalist your story. So the relationship has become really, really important during, the importance of the relationship has become really clear and evident during the pandemic.
So I want to pull everybody on this one, because this is a topic that I know I talk a lot about in my classes, is because all of us have about, Pooja's the young one in the group, but all of us have about the same number of years of experience. And I know that I don't know how many press releases I've written in my life, hundreds, maybe thousands, and so, but one of the topics that's currently being debated in PR is the role of the press release, right? And then the second big thing is how do you break a story? And this is something that in my international class, we talked a lot about this year, and people were all over the board on the press release is dead. You only need it as like an info sheet, whereas other people were saying, Paola, what you said, which is like the press release is still really important. And then the other thing that came up was, well, how do you break a story? Do you break a story on social media? Do you still go to traditional media? So let me get your response on breaking the story, and then I want to go around to everybody, because I think this is a fascinating topic. So in Italia, how do you break a story to the journalist? What do you do?
Well, it depends obviously on the story.
Yep.
For example, if you work on the pharma sector today, every time you talk, journalists are keen to understand what you have to say, because pharma has become really a sensitive topic at the moment, and it's, I think, all around the world. Coming to your point that you said, it's important how you write the press release. We have started doing courses to our very young colleagues, courses of journalism, how they can write a press release from a journalist's point of view, in order to have really the story at the top of the press release, and put all the topic information on that, in order to rise the curiosity of the journalist. And this is very important. What I think is that we are not using social media to pitch stories or to call the journalists. We are really going, first of all, via email, and then take the phone, the mobile phone, and try to explain what we could not do by a written text. So we're still very traditional in this moment in Italy, by sending email and recalling by phone in order really to highlight what are the most important thing in one story.
That's so fascinating. Okay, Ramya, you're up next, only because you're on the next bubble on the camera.
So like Paola was saying, it would really depend on the topic, right? And also depends on the country, I've realized. My company does a lot of work in sub-Saharan Africa. And I realized that in a place like in West Africa, it's really important to have those relationships with the journalists. And they're not that big on, breaking stories on social media. They would rather you write something nicely put together in a press release that they can potentially just copy and paste and send it out. Okay, so this is that part of the world. Right. In the Middle East, they like it a lot more glamorous, I've realized. It has to be packaged in a very different way. So honestly, my experience has been, depends on the topic, depends on the country, depends on the desk that you're pitching to. So there's too many factors. There's no one single answer to that.
Well, but basically, but to your point, the press release is not dead. The press release still has a role in certain areas.
Definitely.
Okay. Ali, what about Mexico?
I think in Mexico, we're still very traditional because the press release has a role, and it's very important because I think that the journalist wants to be differentiated from social media. So they want a press release where they can have like really hard data. And the challenge for the PR agencies or in general is to do the storytelling that very catchy storytelling that really have their attention. So the things that we are doing is to learn how to make journalistic pitches, like the ones that the reporters do to the editors in a regular editorial meeting for any piece. So that's the way that we can sell the story. And also, I think that they're very interesting in having different approaches than the traditional. So we're also trying to look around the information and have it like presented in a more emotional way, with stories about people and how people are affected by this new product or new service or whatever you are talking about, is giving them like more humanistic approach so that they can use it like a material to create different products. I mean, like written pieces, videos, or even for their social media, but we are still using the press releases in a traditional way. And also, we are still, I mean, even with a pandemic, we're doing one-on-one reunions, streaming reunions, but that's very important because that's the only way that you can have this, to build a long-term relationship with the editor or with your spokesman. So this is like the first step to be sure that door will be open in the future, and then you can not only pitch one story, but pitch all the things that the brand is doing.
Okay, I think that's great. All right, Christine, what do you think about in the US?
To answer the original question, I do think press releases still have a role. I agree with what's been said in regard to it being different country to country. We've also seen, like Ali just said, in Mexico, the press release was very important. So we had an announcement going out. Mexico wanted the press release. They wanted it in advance, Mexican journalists. They wanted the desk side briefing, obviously, even in person, this was pre-COVID, to fact check what was in the press release. In the US, the press release, at least for the majority of our clients, which happen to be mostly technology, the press release is more of a check mark. It's important to have on your website. in order to show long-term the growth of your organization. So it's something that is almost more important to have on your website. We don't really use it to pitch journalists. Our pitches are more about what these ladies have been saying about relationships. The relationship is always going to trump everything with the reporter, but you also in PR have to have the ability to quickly build a relationship by being intelligent on how you reach out to each individual reporter. Some of them do want the press release. Some of them could care less. Some of them want to take the quote directly from the press release. In the US, a lot of journalists, just I think because of resources and the industry in and of itself changing and evolving, they don't even do desk side briefings anymore. They'll do it over email, like just answer these questions and get it back to me, which is actually great for us because then we can write exactly what we want.
Exactly.
And the press release is almost a follow along to that. So it does still have a place. It's different country by country. Some people, as has been discussed, are using it to pitch the journalists, and some are just using it as a fact sheet. But in any event, I think it's always important to have on the website to show the evolution of a company.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Those are excellent points. All right, Florence, France or Europe, whatever part you want to, with the exception of Italy, of course. What do you think?
I'll talk about France for this one. Yeah, well, the press release is still very much used in France, but it's not it's something needed, but it's not what's going to help you break a story. But I always found it's very important also for one thing, because it's the official statement of the organization. And when everybody starts to talk, comment, if it's something kind of a hot subject, it's always good to have a reference statement where you get back, which is on your website. I agree with you, Christine. That's very important because you refer to that. You can come back to that. But then when it comes to breaking a story, from my experience lately, what I've found is the best in France is to have a graduated breaking of the story. You give the exclusivity to a couple of journalists in advance, then you release the press release, then you have a circle of journalists to which you are going to propose an interview, and then you go to the third circle, and then you are going just to answer the questions to them. And the fourth circle, they will be very happy to have your press release because they will pick the content from it. So it's all very graduated. And what's interesting is that we're talking about international PR today, and while we are having increasingly international communications, we also have increasingly sharp communications, because we need to adapt, to do almost one-to-one tailor-made communication for each journalist, because that's the guarantee of getting a great coverage, is to really meet the expectation and the interest of these journalists.
Well, that's right. I mean, it underscores the process. It was great because you talked about the process of PR, like putting together a story to appear in an outlet. It's so much work, and I think that's one thing that I've learned over the years is there's so much that goes into doing a story. It's crazy. All right,
Kathryn,
Pooja, what would you like?
Kathryn, can I just
Absolutely, yeah.
One thing that Florence said that was very, very important, and especially for the younger people listening that are just beginning, I think she made a really good point that the press release is the list of facts. And that's important for any company to have, so that no matter how it comes out after a journalist or someone else writes it, you have those proof points, a consistent message, always available, and it's time stamped. So I think that was a really important point that she made.
Oh, I completely agree with you. Pooja, what about you? Did you want to add on this one for India?
Right. So I think I agree with the other panelists, but I just have a slightly different view, because I feel that although press releases still have a role, they are good to have, but they've lost their charm, if I could use that word, during the pandemic, and if an organization is looking for a big feature, then probably press releases is not something that they can opt for. And especially in India, because every journalist is looking for a COVID-related feature or COVID-related story, some connection of an organization with COVID stories. So, I mean, no sector can always do justice by connecting their organization or sector to COVID. And press releases, there are lapses there. So press release can help an organization get like a control story. Maybe if you give like a one pager that you've written, it could be further edited and it could appear like a small snippet or in an online website. But the question to ask is that what you are looking for out of a press release, or are you looking for a big story, the big campaign, the big feature that you've probably pitched or probably shared that press release for? And if a PR person on the other hand, crafts a pitch, giving ideas to the journalist for a story around a topical issue, as well as connects it to the organization story, the result will eventually be bigger and better. This is what I feel. Press releases are still being used, as a PR person needs it on a regular basis to share about an organization, the facts and everything. But I think it's time that the stories be a bit larger, and it all depends on the PR person. So,
well, and I think as we're seeing here, it all depends on the culture. I mean, this has been, to me, this has been like such a fascinating discussion because everybody has slightly different perspectives and the role of the release is varied depending upon the country. Okay, next question. Ramya, you are up. Do you think there's a convergence between PR and marketing?
I think all of the discussions we've had up to this point lead to this very specific question, including the last one, because when you look at it, historically, the concept of PR was born out of the need to propagate many philosophies, including religion. And marketing was this multi-channel exercise aimed at supporting a product. But over the past decade, with the growth of social media and the incredible number of digital storytelling tools available, these, I guess, two traditionally divergent streams have converged to the extent that they have now become intertwined in many ways. And I think various people have spoken about this silo system that used to be in existence. So paid media used to be the primary focus of advertising. Earned media was the primary focus of PR. I think owned media would have been just some marketing material that was owned by marketing. And I don't think there was any such thing as shared media at the time over 10 years ago. But today, PR is no longer just a tactical tool to grow brand awareness. And it has now become an essential element of any company's or any brand's communication strategy. And for a successful communication strategy, it has to rely on a thriving relationship between the two. When these two functions work together, then the marketing teams will have better stories to tell prospective customers, and the PR professionals will know which messages truly resonate with the target audience. And one of the things I remember, there was a time when I used to hire PR agencies to do a lot of work for us in different countries. And PR agencies would hire people based on their relationship with the journalists and their ability to pitch a story. But today's PR agencies have all repositioned themselves. I think Pooja mentioned this as well. Everybody's now positioned themselves as an integrated communications service provider. So they're no longer just looking for a media relations person. They're looking for these storytellers with multi-talented abilities. They want digital content creators, the video production guys, the social media strategies. And at least I know when I'm trying to hire people, sometimes it's like an arms race for the best talent. But the nature of public relations is also changing because storytelling is evolving. And ultimately, whether it's PR or marketing, both functions at their core are really about telling great stories, whether it's about a product, a brand, or a person.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. I know in the research I was doing for my book, it was a lot of the comments that I found from CEOs or whatever was like that the role of PR has evolved tremendously over the past decade. And PR really, if a company has to choose between PR and marketing, they put their money into PR because research has shown with the consumer and the connection with the consumer that earned media, that story by the journalist, whenever publication means so much to the consumer. And the data is just overwhelming. I mean, the biggest stat I saw that 88 to 90% of people will make a purchase decision based upon what they read in a news outlet, which I think is fascinating. And that just underscores, the importance of what PR does. but it's just so funny what you talk. Remember when I was interviewing for jobs years ago, they would be like, well, where are your relationships? What kind of media can you pitch? And my response to all that was always, well, I can pitch any journalist. But, there were certain industries like healthcare, like pharma, that were very specific on, they saw you as a healthcare person or a pharma person or not. And tech is one, and that's kind of where I grew up, was in the tech industry. Tech is one that also was kind of, church and state, but obviously everything has evolved. Who else wants to comment on this one? Christine, I saw you nodding your head and smiling. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. So I can't agree enough that it is evolved in the way that we just discussed. But obviously, we rebranded our own agency from Perkett PR to Mindful Marketing and PR because of that exact reason. And I think if you think about building a story and you think about how you can recall a story, if you're involved in building it and you're part of the messaging and then you're sharing the story, it's just a much stronger message that goes out. So if the PR team or executives are working with marketing, that story has to be consistent. And prior to the last 10 years, sometimes you would see an inconsistency where PR would make some sort of statement through a journalist or maybe their own media, and then marketing wouldn't follow up with that in their promises to a customer, and there would be a big disconnect. I think that the way, I don't know if it's due to social media or I think it's just digital and technology in general, the way PR and marketing have come together have made it much stronger for brands. And we find ourselves right now building the story from the ground up with a lot of our startups. So we just are in the middle, about to launch a new company where we created the name of the company, we created the logo, we're doing the branding, we are writing the sales scripts, the business development strategy, the presentations, and then we're launching it from a PR perspective. So we know this story from the inside out, and I think that can only be a good thing for brands.
Oh, absolutely. 1000% agree with you. Who else wants to comment?
Kathryn?
Yeah, absolutely.
Can
Paola,
I add a comment about what Kathryn and the previous panelist was saying? At least here in Italy, what we are seeing is a really a transformation of PR. In the previous year, PR seems to be like the smallest children of a family, the poorest, the one who had the lowest budget, and had to tell the biggest story. Nowadays, it seems like companies understood that PR is all about storytelling, effective storytelling. So we have been more and more involved with other agencies, also marketing agencies, ADV agencies, social media agencies, in order to have a checkpoint from PR people if the story is really effective, if the contents are really created in the most effective way throughout the process, so from in all the touch points. So we are seeing PR people really being put at the center of the story and guiding and overlooking at all the touch points in order to have consistency, as Christine was saying. And this is something that we're seeing definitely in the last 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, that dovetails exactly what I was saying before. Like, it's just and I think this actually leads us into the next question, but the importance of PR, I think, has been showcased through the whole pandemic, especially. So, Pooja, I know this was your question, which really was, how has COVID-19 or how has the pandemic itself affected the PR industry? And Pooja and I have done a lot of research on this over the past couple of months. So Pooja, why don't you take that one?
Right, sure. So COVID-19 has mostly been hard for the PR industry. And this is something that I'm not randomly saying, but it's actually based on the research that Kathryn and I did very recently during the pandemic. And people across sectors, I mean, PR professionals across sectors said that, it was either hard for them or a mix of easy and hard, depending on which sectors they belong to. So I say this because the key factor or the key aspect that most of them spoke about was that the media relations, which includes relationship building meetings, is like the core of media relations, and that was affected largely during the pandemic. They couldn't really interact with the journalists, they couldn't meet the other stakeholders, and this actually disrupted a lot of stories. And in fact, pitching to a particular client, pitching to a new client, pitching to a journalist about the new development was getting difficult, you know. So, I mean, people in sectors like health, technology, and education are still able to connect on the stories of their organization during the COVID. But think about people in hospitality sector who earlier only focused, you know, on, you know, maybe the kind of attention or on the kind of recipes that their star chef was making, or their latest property that they've come up with, or some new event, some lifestyle luxurious event. So all of this got disrupted. Similarly for real estate, you know, all these factors were there. The only PR mileage that an organization could gather was by talking about their CSR or philanthropic initiatives, because they were there able to connect with COVID-19. So PR practitioners who were not really focused on these particular aspects, by this I mean philanthropy and CSR, they started focusing on that. They started doing that. They started giving that kind of advice to their clients, their organization, that, you know, you should talk about the COVID-19 pandemic connected with CSR aspect, and then probably the journalists would be keen to write about it. And despite many challenges, a PR practitioner never really stops ideating for their organization. So yeah, these were some of the points I thought I'll talk about. Yeah.
Okay, anyone else want to comment on this one?
Yeah, just wanted to say a word about the European Commission, because in the past year, we've been, well, the way we work with them is that they come to us and say, well, we would like to pass this message on this subject in these countries, and so can you develop a campaign about that? And we have had very few demands actually in the past month, because each time the decision makers at the European Commission felt that it was not appropriate. There was a project of specific campaign on green mobility, for instance, and they ended canceling it because they felt it was inappropriate to communicate. It was not in line with the audience's preoccupations. So I think, well, I've seen that in my daily job, but I'm pretty sure it impacts all the organization and the companies also. It's you feel you can't, you feel kind of superficial a little bit talking about certain subjects, and you feel that you have an obligation of being profound and showing your utility to the society, how useful you are in a way or another. So I think it has really put a prism on the way organizations are approaching how they want to interact with their target audience.
Yeah, I think to your point, how they communicate the brand or the value of the brand or the importance of the brand. Brands that were based somewhat on maybe say exclusivity or puffery, I don't know how else to say it, but falsities. I think they've had to reconnect or rethink who they are and what do they really do? What value do they really provide to the consumer? Because that's not necessarily the most important thing right now. Anyone else?
Can I add, Kathryn?
Sure, of course.
Yeah. So, you know, there was one point that I missed talking about, that, you know, everything became virtual. So virtual meetings, virtual tours, virtual press conferences, everything has been shifted in that mode. And I think earlier, nobody really experimented this aspect, but this completely changed how PR functioned. So even universities, even you know, the schools, they started showcasing their infrastructure through videos and virtual tours just to attract admissions of, you know, new people, new students. And I also know about, I could say that there were PR professionals, senior PR professionals, who earlier sweared on just doing press releases, but then now they want to opt for social media as a tool. So these were some of the, you know, aspects that changed, right?
Yeah, I think you know, it was interesting in our research. The one thing that people were so eager to get back to was what we've all been talking about was reconnecting those media relationships, because that is, you know, as we've all been saying, the storytelling of what we do was so incredibly infected by the pandemic because we couldn't be in person. It's one thing to do it over Zoom, but it's another thing to be sitting, having a coffee with a reporter and talking about things and not having to do a hard pitch, but more of a soft sell. All right, last question. Pooja, you're going to lead, and then I want everybody to respond with a quick one. So we'll do one skill. What is one skill that you think is critical to being successful in PR? Pooja, you go first.
Okay, so I would say that someone with a knack of learning new things or curiosity to delve deeper would be skill number one. The PR person should always ask why. That's like the question they should ask on everything. It's like, why are we doing this? Why do we have this particular target audience? Why this particular initiative? So that inquisitive nature should be there as skill number one. The students who are attending this should ask, why will attending this 10-day conference help me? So this is skill number one. If you allow me for skill number two, then I can.
Okay, you can do two, and then we're going to move on. Yeah, do two. Okay.
Okay. So the skill number two goes without saying that, he or she should be a storyteller. Okay. And now, how does one become a storyteller? That happens with reading and writing. If a person reads anything, fiction, non-fiction, they start understanding different styles of writing. So reading also gives ideas to writing your own piece. So in short, a person with good communication skills could be a good storyteller. These days, even a person who can create interesting video content can also be labeled in the same category. So if you are a great storyteller and you like to spend time on social media, then you can easily create engaging content for people. But just because you're socially active doesn't necessarily mean that you could be a great storyteller.
There you go. All right, love that. Okay, Ramya, you're up next.
She's already covered the storyteller part, so I have to do something else. Well, okay, I think given that the previous question really was about the convergence of PR and marketing, I think it's very important to have digital marketing skills. It's impossible to survive in the PR business today without knowing the basics of things like search engine optimization, keyword research, data analytics, trends analysis. Without these skills, I think it's going to be very, very hard to survive in the PR business in the future.
That's great. I totally agree. Christine, I'm going to call on you next because I know you're going to build well on that one.
Well, I would say, yes, you definitely have to have the digital skills, but just as a personality, the ability to pivot quickly and with grace is vital. You can have the greatest story lined up on the best broadcast TV network and war could break out and your story is gone. So now what? So you've got to be able to do that with grace and intelligence. And then the other critical thing that I think you need today, the talent or to Pooja's point, being inquisitive is the ability to analyze and make decisions from analytics.
Excellent. I totally agree. Florence, you're up.
Well, I want to say I completely agree with Ramya about the digital skills. We can talk about many conceptual things, but at one point you need to understand how to push a post and search stuff. So I completely agree on that. Another one I would say is to be a very precise person. And from my beginnings, I don't think it was that so much needed before, but today you have to be precise in your wording, you have to be precise in your targeting, in your timing, and that comes back to what I was telling about doing almost one-to-one PR with some key editors. You really have, you can do anything which is mass.
Yeah, so, I completely.
So it's really, surgical.
Well, because we can't be wrong, right? We have to be precise and we have to be focused because we can't be wrong with our information because you can't give bad data to a journalist. So
that comes back to Pooja's point too, which is you need to be able to explain why you are saying something. You can't really just have a statement. We are an environmental sensitive company. We're supportive to the population. You need to prove. You need to be precise.
Absolutely. Okay, Paola, how about you?
Well, I think building on the curiosity that was said at the beginning, I think curiosity is very important, but you also have the ability to connect the dots. So if you read a story in a headline or a newspapers, you need to really to think if that story is something that your company or your clients may enter in that conversation and tell his thoughts or his point of view on that story. So you really need to be curious, but also be able to build on what you read in order to understand if you have a point of view to share to media or on social media.
That's excellent. And I think I know some pitch opportunities or story opportunities come from reading and figuring out what hasn't been written about. You know, what's the white space? What's the headline that hasn't been covered? It's so, I mean, I know I've, over the years, you spend hours reading XYZ magazines or publications that have covered an angle, and then you were like, but wait, they didn't cover this specific one. And you go back to a report with that, and they're like, wow, I never thought about that. So connecting the dots and being curious, it's so incredibly important. Okay, Ali, you are up.
Yeah, I mean, following to that point, I think that the context is very important, because you have to know the context of your audience or the context of the media that you're pitching to, because that's the way that you can connect. Otherwise, you can place your messaging correctly, and it can work in the other side, because you can look like no empathic to the things that are going around. So I think that you have to be familiar to the media landscape of your country, and also to the public conversation that is going on in social media, as well as in the media outlets.
Yeah, no, it's so monitoring the world and knowing the context is so incredibly important to positioning that story well. I couldn't agree more. So just to recap our top 9: being inquisitive, storytelling, digital marketing skills, ability to pivot quickly with grace and intelligence. Christine, I'm going to quote you on that one. To be able to analyze and make decisions from analytics, digital skills, being precise, being able to connect the dots and build on what you read, and of course, context and understanding the context of the audience, the public conversation, and putting those together. And then I'll add my 10th, and I would say patience would be my final one. I think it's important to be patient and to sometimes be humble where you need to, because part of what we do is balancing personalities. And sometimes you are going to have a very strong-willed journalist or a very strong-willed executive, or sometimes both. And we, as the connector between the journalist and the organization, sometimes have to balance and pivot in ways that we never thought we could do. And I think patience is critical with that. So that's the one that I would add. Okay, so we have about 8 minutes left for questions. Does anybody who's listening, who's zoomed into this presentation, have a question or two that they'd like us to answer?
Thank you, everyone. I would like to thank all our panelists for taking out time from their busy schedules and joining us. I think a very important points were highlighted in today's discussion. A few of them being how PR tools have evolved over the period of time, and how we've changed from mass mails to customized 360-degree approach plans. What is the importance of storytelling, and how important it is for PR practitioners to know what their brand is, what the value of the brand is, and what the personality of the brand is. So I do have a few questions from the students. The first question is, what is the future of influencers with respect to PR practices?
Who wants to go with that one? All right, I'll take a quick lead, and then anybody can chime in. I would say future influences, a couple of things. One is kind of just the politics is one, global politics. But I think recognizing that countries that we are not, public relations is not central, it's international, as we've talked about today. And understanding the importance of politics in the world and how that influences campaigns and the role of campaigns is hugely important influence, and COVID has exemplified that. Anyone else want to add? Christine, go ahead.
I would just build on that, not just politics, but culture in general and how it's being perceived around the world. For example, on social media, if you're using humor and you're targeting an international audience, how is that humor perceived? It could be the use of animals, for example. It could be anything like that. Or the hashtag, as we talked about earlier, that you've really got to look at the international landscape and how those things are received globally.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Our next question is related to crisis communication. Suchi Pathak wants to know, how and where do we break stories in cases of crisis communication, and what is the narrative that is usually followed?
Who wants to take that one? Ramya, do you want to go with that one?
Yeah, I can. But Mudita, can you repeat that again? I just want to understand the context.
Yeah, yes, sure. So she wants to know that how and where do we break a story in case of crisis communication, and what is the usual narrative that is followed while breaking the story?
I think more than how and where, it's really how quickly do you do it. If you have a crisis situation, there was a time where you could afford to wait 24 hours before you responded to a situation. I think we need to focus more on how quickly can you do it, how quickly you have your facts in place, how quickly can you get a spokesperson in front of a journalist if that's necessary at that point in time. I think now it's more like everything is breaking news. So it has to be probably within the first 1 hour, 1 to 2 hours, and then already that situation is either escalating or evolving. So a lot would really depend on the nature of the crisis and your industry.
Just building on what you're saying is I think it's important. Time is of the essence. You know, one of the things we always talk about is you want to get ahead of the story. You don't want the media to write the story without you. So I agree. You want to come out in a controlled way. You want to say stuff that's based on fact. And it's better to get out and say, you know, we acknowledge what has happened. We're looking into the situation, as opposed to saying nothing. And I think an example, a horrible example that's going on in the United States right now is the collapse of that apartment building in Miami. You know, they are doing all they can, and they are telling people they're doing all they can, and they're going kind of, and I think Christine would agree with me on this one, they're sort of following textbook formula. They have a press conference every day. They have the same spokespeople every day. It's very controlled. And, you know, they address criticism that they're getting, they address it head on. And it's such a sad thing that happened. But as Ramya is saying, like, so much of it depends upon what the crisis actually is. But the most important thing is to get in front of that story and only say what you know is true. You don't ever want to use any hyperbole or any, well, maybes in a crisis. Sticking to the facts is one of the most important things.
And if
Just
I
like
can
to add one point. Sorry.
Florence, go ahead.
Go ahead, Pooja.
Yeah, I was just trying to say one point that during crisis, it's always important to also work with the legal team, just to understand what are the legal aspects, if there are any involved. Because one word, if you use, you know, which makes a different sense, it can just blow off the reputation of the organization. So yeah, that is what I wanted to say.
Florence, go ahead.
I agree. Yeah, I just wanted also to talk about anticipation. Of course, you can't anticipate everything, and not the collapse of a building, among others. And it depending on your organization activity, it's more dangerous in some than in others. But now I think that now, given with the social network and everything, rumors increasing, developing at an incredible pace. It's important to know who will speak, to media train the speaker, just to check that he or she will be comfortable and able to do the job, and to try to have a few scenarios and have a few be as ready as you can to a situation that you don't know yet, but anticipate as much as you can.
Thank you. I have a few more questions, but since we're running out of time, this will be my last question. This is from Aryan. He wants to know, with the tools and strategies of PR and advertising available to everyone for an affordable cost and knowledge, with less of a learning curve, what will be the future of PR agencies? And there is one more related question, which says, like, what are some of these tools that can be used to build a personality of a brand?
Who wants to take that one? So let's say, as we've discussed, that we've realized that the future tools and strategies for agencies and also in-house PR people, it's a blend of digital and traditional. So it's a blend of digital media, understanding SEO and other types of data analytics, which is at the forefront. And then it's also leveraging traditional techniques such as press releases, desk side briefings. But what's the important overarching tool is the ability to tell stories, we've all said, and the ability to be able to integrate the traditional with the digital platforms to create a story that supports the brand, that represents the brand in the way that the client wants to be represented, that most connects with their target market. Anyone else want to chime in on that one?
So I think I would just say one thing, that PR will always have a longer shelf life as compared to advertising, which always have like a shorter shelf life. You just give an ad if you have the money, and then once the money is up, then it's over. But PR, the stories, the narrative that you create always stays on. And I think that is what is important to understand. Yeah.
Well, before Madita chimes in, I just want to thank everybody. This has been so much fun for me to put together and to meet. Christine was the only one that I really knew from back in the day. But I've gotten to know you all in wonderful ways over the past couple of months. And I really want to thank you for taking the time to do this with me. And I hope you've had as much fun as I've had. And I've learned so much. I took like many pages of notes. And I can't wait to share all this information with my students in the fall. And I look forward to asking every one of you to guest lecture in my courses. That's all I can say. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for all the wisdom shared and sharing global outlook on PR practices. I would especially like to thank Ms. Lancioni for chairing such a stellar transnational panel. I would also like to thank Khushi Chaudhary and Abhishek Mishra for helping me conduct the session. Over to you, Abhishek.
Thank you, ma'am. I'd like to thank all our guests for such an inspiring and informative session. Now, I would like to request Professor Dr. Susmita Bala, Head DME Media School, Delhi Metropolitan Education, Chief Associate Convener, ICAN4, to give the closing remarks.
Thank you, Abhishek. Thanks, Kathryn, for planning such a fascinating panel and having such a rich discussion with diverse viewpoints. Thanks, Christine, Paola, Florence, Ellie, Ramya, and our own Dr. Pooja Arora. Your thoughts have expanded our horizon. Thank you all. Thanks to all the participants and attendees in this session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for your appreciative words. I would like to extend my gratitude to Professor Dr. Amrish Saxena, Dean DME Media School, Convener ICAN4, and Professor Dr. Susmita Bala, Head DME Media School, Chief Associate Convener ICAN4, for the entire ideation and planning of all the sessions. I would like to thank Dr. Manasvi Maheshwari, Ms. Manmeet Kaur, Ms. Shruti VS, Ms. Mudita Raj, Ms. Krishna Pandey, Mr. Mohit Kishovarts, and Mr. Pramod Kumar Pandey for their constant support and guidance. A heartfelt thanks to Mr. Ritvik Ghosh, Mr. Sumantra Sarthidas, Mr. Sachin Nair, and Mr. Yogesh Sharma for providing the overall digital operations in the ICAN4. I'd like to thank our newsletter team comprising of both students and faculty members, namely Ms. Sukriti Arora and Dr. Teenam Vora, for constantly supervising and mentoring the team. Also, I'd like to thank Mr. Mohammad Kamil and Ms. Krishna Pandey for working around the clock in all the press proceedings. You can keep a check on our press proceedings on the official Facebook page of ICAN. I'd like to thank Mr. Anmol Mehta from our DME family and Mr. Sumohit Nirala from one of our knowledge partners, Kiamangalam Universities, and for tirelessly working in making our events look more beautiful, digitally so with the help of his prolific designs. I would also like to thank our entire team, all faculty members and students who have worked day and night, facing all the challenges and obstacles of the pandemic to make this conference happen. Lastly, I thank our audience for being here and contributing. Thank you so much.
I hope you all have given your precious feedback. If not, then please do it now. The link is being shared in the chat box. For all the new updates, stay in touch with us through our social media handles. The links are being shared in the chat box right now. And don't forget to visit the DMU website and the ICAN4 website for all and any details. And here we complete the day 9 of the second edition of the world's first 10-day Digital Live International Conference, ICAN4. We are looking forward to the last day filled with knowledge, expertise, and deliberations on a diversity of topics. In the past days, we witnessed eminent scholars from around the world talking about contemporary issues and debates and enlightening us with their wisdom. In ICAN4, we unraveled various aspects of information, communication, and artificial networks. The session scheduled for day 10, that is tomorrow, are a technical session on impact of digitalization on content, blockchain, and events presided by Dr. Padma Rani at 10 a.m. IST, and a valedictory ceremony at 5 p.m. IST, and a cultural session at 7 p.m. IST. With an incitement to see you all tomorrow with this wonderful lineup of sessions, I, Khushi Chaudhary, and my co-host Abhishek Mishra take your leave for today. Good night, take care, stay safe, everyone.